The state of monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth. For kings are not only God's lieutenants on earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself they are called gods. This short quote from King James VI and I is a cornerstone of this man's entire philosophy. Taken away from his mother at a young age and spending hours with his various teachers learning about statecraft, James did not develop the way a young boy usually would. He did not see himself as anything more than just a king, and believed that he was chosen by God to rule Scotland and, later on, England. Although he never lived to see its unification, the rule of King James laid the groundwork for the eventual creation of Great Britain from England and Scotland. James was born to Mary, Queen of Scots, and Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, neither of whom he would see for most of his lifetime. He was baptized a Roman Catholic as Charles James, Prince and Stewart of Scotland, Duke of Rothesay, Earl of Kyle, Carrick and Cunningham, Lord of the Isles, and Baron of Renfrew. Our future king's godparents were King Charles IX of France, Queen Elizabeth I of England, and Duke Emmanuel Philibert of Savoy. Not a single one showed up to his baptism. Only a year after James was born, his mother was forced to abdicate, and James was crowned King of Scotland. Being thrust into a position like that permanently affected his outlook on life, as he lived the rest of his days believing that he was chosen by God to be king, and that kings were God-ordained lieutenants to carry out his teachings. Of course, being so young, there was a long chain of regents before James was allowed to take full authority as king. To help raise James to become a good and noble king, the Privy Council appointed a team of tutors to teach him. Among them included George Buchanan, Peter Young, Adam Erskine, and David Erskine. I probably pronounced those wrong. Buchanan, the lead tutor, was harsh and strict, and it is well known that he would beat the young king. Despite his abusive character, King James was still influenced by Buchanan to become a lifelong lover of culture, especially literature. He had a strong thirst for learning, reflected by his passion for reading. However, not all of Buchanan's teachings stuck. George Buchanan believed strongly in a limited monarchy. He believed that the power of the king came from the people, and the king should respect them. King James, however, begged to differ. As has been mentioned already, King James viewed himself as being chosen by God, and would eventually become one of the most absolute monarchs in English and Scottish history. In fact, his absolutism actually surpassed the English tradition. England had had a fairly limited monarchy since its conception, and as time went on, it only became more limited. Ever since the signing of the Magna Carta, it was generally viewed that the king was under the law, that the law rules the land. King James did not come to England with this perception. In his eyes, the king was the law, and what he says goes. As time went on, the young king's absolutist worldview began to reveal itself. He made increasingly independent decisions and wrangled the nobility until he truly was an absolute king of Scotland, making decisions completely independent of the compelling of the nobility. Upon the death of Queen Elizabeth I of England in 1603, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England. His reign saw peace restored between England and Spain, the growing popularization of the theater, conflicts with Parliament, the rise of Puritans, and the creation of the KJV Bible, and the beginning of the colonization of America. All of these are important, but for the purpose of this video, we will only be discussing those last 2 points: the translation of the Bible into the English KJV Bible, and the creation of American colonies. In 1604, King James I commissioned the translation of the Bible into English, calling forth England's greatest scholars, theologians, and philosophers of the time to help in this undertaking. It was a massive project, taking years, but by 1611 it was published with the approval of the king. It became known as the King James Version, or the Authorized Version of the Bible. It was through this translation that King James asserted his authority. The commoner could now read the Bible in their own language, and every Bible they would have gotten had the king's name on it. This translation supported the idea that the king truly was chosen by God to rule, since it was a king himself who wanted the people to read and understand the scriptures for themselves. Or at least, that is what King James wanted them to think. And now, on to the colonization of America. In 1606, England sent 104 English men and boys to find a spot to settle in this new world. When they eventually reached their destination in 1607, they decided to name the colony after the king, and it was called Jamestown. This little town laid the groundwork for what would become the United States of America, as many of you may already know. This, naming the town after the king, showed the respect these men had for their king, and it once again showed his authority over all English and Scottish lands, whether they lay in the British Isles or halfway across the world. Of course, looking at his reign, you'll notice his absolutism and his eccentricism, but neither of these is as important as the idea that King James brought. That is the idea of Great Britain. Despite not officially being given the title, and despite the English and Scottish parliaments remaining as separate entities, King James called himself the King of Great Britain. This, calling himself the King of Great Britain, laid the idea of Great Britain in the heads of the English and Scottish people. James, by dual-wielding the English and Scottish crowns, being a Scottish king living in and ruling over England, made the idea of unification not only plausible, but inevitable. King James established the Stuart dynasty in two different kingdoms. It would only make sense that at some point, the parliaments would unite just as the crowns had united. Almost a century later, it was under the last Stuart monarch, Queen Anne, that the Acts of Union were passed. Great Britain was born. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for 300 subscribers. I didn't think I would make it to that number so quickly, but I just really appreciate all of you out there who supported my channel in any way. And I have to ask that if you have not already, that you like this video, subscribe, and maybe tell one of your friends about the channel. That is all I've got. Goodbye.